Ever stumble across those places that just feel like they're bursting with untold stories?
Mm.
Places where the air is thick with secrets.
You can practically feel the weight of the past pressing down on you.
Well, get ready for a deep dive into one of those spots, Cortijo Jurado.
A Spanish country estate that's got a way spookier backstory than your average haunted house.
We're talking creepy YouTube rabbit holes, local legends that'll keep you up at night, even whispers of paranormal investigators drawn to its mysteries.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here.
And you know our listeners, always up for a good mystery. So we're going to wade through the spooky stories, separate fact from fiction, and see what secrets we uncover.
What gets me about Cortijo Jurado is, even without the ghost stories, it's got this inherently eerie vibe. You're talking mid-1800s, grand architecture, the kind of place that just screams wealth and privilege.
It's like something out of a Gothic novel, and not the friendly kind.
Yeah, right. Not your cozy mystery, that's for sure. This place was the real deal, a statement estate built for the Heredia family, who later passed it on to the Jurados. And what's interesting is, it wasn't all just about lavish parties and leisurely siestas, you know?
Oh yeah, I was reading about that. This wasn't just a summer home for them, it was a whole operation.
Exactly. Cortijo Jurado was a fully functioning estate. Think fields of crops, workers bustling about, livestock. They weren't just relaxing there, this was business, a family legacy.
It really makes you rethink those images we have of grand estates.
Yeah.
You know, we picture lavish parties, but this was also their livelihood, their legacy.
Absolutely. A piece of history.
But like any good mystery, there's a twist. Around the late 1800s, early 1900s, whispers start circulating about young women disappearing.
Uh-oh.
And wouldn't you know it, the shadow of Cortijo Jurado seems to loom large.
I bet. It's like something out of a horror movie.
Totally. And the details from what I've gathered just get creepier. The sources mention bodies discovered by the Campanillas River, close enough to make you wonder.
Yeah, that proximity is definitely unsettling. It's like a direct link back to the estate.
Like a breadcrumb trail of tragedy.
Almost.
And as you can imagine, with these kinds of discoveries, the rumor mill went into overdrive.
Naturally.
Suddenly, the Heredia family, their wealthy friends, the Larios, they became the villains in this whispered conspiracy.
Oh, wow.
It's got all the ingredients, right?
Huh.
You got secret societies, whispers of dark rituals, powerful people covering up unspeakable acts. It's the kind of story that grabs you and just doesn't let go.
And it makes you wonder, what's the line between truth and exaggeration? How much of this is rooted in real events, and how much has been embellished over time?
Especially back then. I mean, you didn't have social media spreading rumors at lightning speed, but word of mouth can be just as powerful, right?
Absolutely. And we can't forget the historical context. This was a period of significant social upheaval in Spain.
Right. Things were changing, and when that happens, people get nervous, suspicious.
Exactly. And those in power, those who seem to have it all, they become easy targets for suspicion, for blame.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So how much of this fear, this suspicion, seeped into the story of Cortijo Jurado?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely a factor to consider. Because when we look at the actual historical records, things get a bit murky. We do have confirmation of 5 deaths connected to the estate, all young women between the ages of 18 and 20.
All young women. Okay, that's extra creepy.
It is quite unsettling.
But were they murdered? Was it some elaborate ritual like the rumors suggest?
Well, that's where the legend and reality seem to diverge. There's no concrete evidence, no proof of torture or ritualistic practices.
So we've got verifiable deaths, young women connected to the estate.
Tragic on its own, but...
But the juiciest parts, the most terrifying details, those might be more storytelling than historical fact.
It seems that way, at least from what we can gather from reliable sources.
Which brings us to, arguably, the most fascinating and enduring part of the Cortijo Jurado legend.
Let me guess. The tunnels.
You got it. The secret passages, the hidden world beneath the estate. It's the stuff ghost hunting dreams are made of.
Right, you see that on every paranormal show, the secret tunnels, the hidden chambers.
And for good reason.
Yeah.
It plays into our deepest fears and fascinations. The idea that there's this whole other world hidden beneath the surface, operating by its own rules.
Secret rendezvous, maybe even more sinister activities.
Exactly, it's like something out of a Dan Brown novel. And the craziest part, there are first-hand accounts that seem to back it up. Like there's this story of Manuel Martin from 1932.
Oh yeah, I remember reading about him.
He claimed he fell into a well on the property and stumbled into a secret chamber. And get this, it was filled with bones, chains, even what appeared to be torture devices.
His story is pretty terrifying, you have to admit. And it's easy to get caught up in the chills of it all, but then you have to put on your logical thinking cap and ask,
Wait a minute.
yeah, if these tunnels were intended to move bodies, to conceal illicit activities, wouldn't a more practical, less extravagant solution have been chosen?
It's true. Building an elaborate tunnel system is expensive and risky. You're bound to attract attention if you're bringing in that much material, that many workers.
Exactly. Not exactly the best way to keep a secret.
Right. Not to mention, all the searches conducted over the years. If these tunnels are so extensive, wouldn't someone have found concrete evidence by now?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? Which begs the question, is the allure of the legend, the mystery of it all, more appealing than the reality?
Because, let's be honest, a hidden chamber full of bones is way more exciting than a collapsed well or a mundane storage cellar, even if it's not true.
It's the same reason we love a good ghost story. We're drawn to the unexplainable, the things that go bump in the night.
But even if we set aside the murder rumors, the elusive tunnels, there's no escaping the fact that Cortijo Jurado has become synonymous with something else entirely, the paranormal.
And that's a whole other can of worms, isn't it?
It really is.
So are you ready to delve into the world of EVPs, sudden cold spots, and ghostly apparitions?
Because I have to admit, even the biggest skeptic has to wonder about some of the stories from this place.
I mean, let's be real. Who hasn't felt a little chill down their spine thinking about a creepy old house?
Right. It's practically human nature to be drawn to those spooky stories.
Exactly. But before we go full-on ghost hunting, I think it's worth circling back to those families we mentioned. The Heredias, the Larios. They weren't just characters in a ghost story. They were real people living in a very specific time and place.
You're right. We can't lose sight of the historical context. What was life actually like back then for families like the Heredias?
Well, they rose to prominence during a fascinating period in Spain, the Industrial Revolution. Think boom times, rapid change, new money.
So they were like the self-made entrepreneurs of their day, building an empire from the ground up.
Exactly. And like many successful families, they wanted everyone to know it. That's where Cortijo Jurado comes in. It wasn't just a home, it was a symbol of their wealth, their status.
A status symbol, a landmark, a statement. I wonder if that kind of extravagance made them a target later on.
That's an interesting thought, and it's certainly possible. Because when we look at what happened in the late 1800s, the Heredias were facing some financial difficulties, and they ended up selling Cortijo Jurado to the Larios family.
Ah, so the Larios inherit not just a beautiful estate, but all the baggage that came with it.
And keep in mind, this was a time of economic uncertainty in Spain. People were on edge, rumors were flying.
And in times like that, it's easy to look for someone to blame.
Human nature, unfortunately.
So the Larios family, already linked to the Heredias, they walk into this situation, and then the rumors about the missing girls start circulating.
It's like a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
A perfect storm of suspicion and fear. And I bet those rumors got blown out of proportion pretty quickly. It's like a game of telephone, you know?
Right. The story changes with each retelling.
Until you can barely recognize the original truth.
And we've seen it happen time and time again throughout history. When fear takes hold, it's amazing how quickly a story can morph into something truly monstrous.
It makes you wonder about the stories we tell about haunted places. How much is rooted in truth, and how much is a product of fear and speculation?
It's a question worth pondering, for sure.
It really is. But okay, let's shift gears for a moment and dive into those paranormal claims. I know we've touched on them, but you mentioned EVPs earlier. Those always creep me out, even though I know how easily sounds can be misinterpreted.
Oh, absolutely. Our brains are wired to find patterns, to make sense of the world around us. So when we hear a strange noise, especially in a place like Cortijo Jurado, it's easy for our imaginations to run wild.
You're telling me, 1 minute it's a creaking floorboard, the next minute it's a ghostly footstep.
Right. Our minds fill in the blanks, especially when we're already primed to believe something spooky is going on.
And it's not just the sounds, right? There are the cold spots, the objects moving on their own, even people claiming to see apparitions.
And these experiences often come with a whole range of intense emotions.
Yeah.
Fear, dread, the feeling of being watched.
That primal instinct. It's like the hairs on the back of your neck just stand up and you know something isn't right.
Exactly. But here's the thing. How much of that is genuine paranormal activity, and how much is our own minds playing tricks on us?
Good question. I mean, you mentioned old houses making weird noises. Could some of these experiences be explained by more mundane factors?
Absolutely. Old buildings like Cortijo Jurado are practically ecosystems unto themselves. Drafty hallways, shifting foundations, faulty wiring, All of that can contribute to strange and unexplainable events.
Okay, that makes sense for some things, but what about the stories that seem a little harder to brush off? Like, I was reading about a Ouija board session at the Cortijo that really freaked people out.
Ah, yes, the Ouija board, a classic tool for supposedly communicating with the spirit world.
But isn't it also possible that it's just a way of tapping into our subconscious? Like, we're in this creepy old house, we're expecting something to happen.
And bam, the planchette starts moving, spelling out messages that seem to confirm our deepest fears.
It's like our minds are creating the experience even if we don't realize it.
Precisely. Now, I'm not saying that genuine paranormal activity doesn't exist, but I do think it's important to be aware of how powerful our minds are, especially in environments like this.
So, when it comes to a place like Cortijo Jurado, how do we separate fact from fiction? How do we know what's real and what's just a product of our imaginations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I don't think there's always a clear-cut answer.
Maybe that's part of the allure, though, right? The not knowing for sure.
Absolutely. It's like that saying, sometimes it's better to let sleeping dogs lie.
Or in this case, sleeping spirits.
Something like that. But hey, speaking of things we may never know for sure, let's talk about that film crew that had a string of unfortunate events at Cortijo Jurado.
Oh man, their story's wild. It's like something out of a horror movie itself.
Right. It's become almost legendary in paranormal circles.
You've got equipment malfunctioning, a near-fatal accident on set, and to top it all off, creepy figures appearing in the footage.
Talk about spooky. It's enough to make anyone think twice about stepping foot in that place.
So how do we reconcile those experiences with everything else we've learned? I mean, is it possible that Cortijo Jurado is just a naturally accident-prone building?
It's certainly possible. I mean, old buildings have a way of being temperamental. Faulty wiring, uneven floors, things like that can definitely lead to accidents.
Not to mention the psychological factor.
Exactly. That film crew was already working on a horror project, right? So their minds were primed for the strange and unusual.
So it's like every creak of the floorboard, every flicker of a light suddenly takes on this sinister meaning.
It's amazing how our perception can be influenced by our environment and our expectations.
For sure. It's like that saying, we see what we want to see. Or in this case, what we're afraid to see.
I think you hit the nail on the head. But what about the broader picture? What about the future of Cortijo Jurado?
Right. It's had all these plans, these grand ambitions for renovation. A luxury hotel, office spaces.
They even talked about turning it into a museum at one point, didn't they?
Yeah, there were all these ideas floating around, but nothing seemed to stick. It's almost like the Cortijo itself resists change.
It's true. It's had several near rebirths, only to fall back into disrepair. Maybe it's the economy, maybe it's the building itself, or maybe, just maybe,
It's those whispers from the past, the echoes of those unsolved mysteries.
it makes you wonder, doesn't it? But as of late 2022, it sounds like there are new plans to turn it into an office complex. Can you imagine working in a place like that?
Knowing its history, it would certainly make for an interesting commute.
That's putting it mildly. But seriously, it makes you think about the legacy of a place like Cortijo Jurado.
Right. It's seen so much, heard so many stories. Will it ever truly escape its past? Or will those whispers of tragedy and mystery continue to shape its destiny?
Those are questions for the ages, my friend.
They certainly are. Well, on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive into Cortijo Jurado,
I have to say, it's been a fascinating journey.
to say the least. So, to our amazing listeners, we leave you with this. The next time you stumble across a place that feels a little off, a little mysterious,
A place with stories etched into its very walls.
ask yourself, what whispers are you listening to? And are you brave enough to uncover the truth?
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the lights on.